Hello, hello. Welcome to the Pure Desire Podcast on YouTube. I am your host, Trevor Windsor. This is a weekly podcast helping you take back your life from the effects of unwanted sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. Sexual brokenness impacts us all, men and women who are stuck in shame and are unsure if healing is actually possible. Church leaders who want to help but don't know where to start. Parents who don't know how to help their kids develop sexual integrity. Wherever you're at, this podcast is for you. Through sharing stories of healing, interviewing addiction and betrayal experts, and normalizing the conversation on sexuality, we offer a clear plan for recovery and healing from the effects of unwanted sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. You have what it takes to break free, heal your relationships, and take back your life. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us so much and really just pushes our message forward. All right, with that, let's get to this week's episode. Eddie Capparucci, welcome, man, to the Pure Desire Podcast. We are excited to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me here. I've really been looking forward to talking to you gentlemen. And as I said before, we have a lot probably to cover today.
Yes, we do. So we've interacted a number of times. I've heard you on a number of different podcasts. And recently I just read through your book, Why Men Struggle to Love. And some of the topics that we're going to touch on today are specifically from that book, but also your book, Going Deeper. So you made a point to emphasize that some of these themes are developed in both of those books. And so we'll have those in the show notes as well. But today we specifically are looking at the topic of our inner child, and just hold for awkward pause as we're listening, because there are some people that language seems kind of funny or off, as we'll get into. But Eddie, before we jump into it, can you just let our listeners know who maybe aren't familiar with you or your work, just a little bit about yourself, your story, and the resources that you have out in the world?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. I am a licensed professional counselor. I have a practice in Highland, North Carolina. I'm licensed by both the state of Georgia and North Carolina. This is a second career for me. This was a God thing that came. I struggled with my own addiction when I was younger. From the time I was about 16, I was more of a womanizer and couldn't quite understand what that was all about. I actually ran through and destroyed a couple marriages because of it, just being, jumping from one woman to another. Finally, after the second marriage collapsed, I said, you know what, I really need to go and find out what's wrong. And I sought help, and what I found out was I have what you would call an avoidant attachment, and therefore never kept both feet in a relationship, had one foot in, one foot out. What was that about? Well, it's about the fact that when I was 5, my father died suddenly of a heart attack. My mother had a nervous breakdown, and I was sent out to relatives who I didn't know. So here I am, 5, I'm with these strangers. I'm there for almost a year. Come back, my mom has to work. I have 2 older sisters who are raising me. They don't really want to be bothered by a 6-year-old boy. So I spent a lot of time by myself alone. But the whole point of why I tell that story also is it was through learning, as I got older, what was the problem here? 1 foot in and 1 foot out of a relationship. And why? Because for me, as a young child, I developed this mentality, not really having the thought, but the people who love you will leave you, and the people who love you are not dependable. So subconsciously, that's sitting with me all the time. So any relationship I'm in, as soon as I get an inkling, like somebody's angry with me for something or whatever, there I go. I'm starting to pull away and move out of that relationship very quickly. And that is really the basis of what the whole inner child model is that I created. It's based on the fact of trauma and neglect that we went through as children, that we're dealing with unresolved childhood pain points that are still haunting us today.
Yeah, we're big fans of yours, Eddie, and the work you're doing. And I love the way even right there, you were able to tell in a pretty short time frame a cohesive story of like my past and the wounds and lies that it created and how it led to my behavior. And we just find so often that the average person, including the average Christian, is not able to do that, that there is a huge disconnect between their current life and struggles and their past. And that can happen for a number of reasons, but I think we're going to get to jump into some of that today. And so let's circle in on this idea of the inner child. And I think for many, especially Christians, as Trevor alluded to, the language or phrase like inner child and some of the other terms that might come up around it can feel new agey to people, or can feel like something worldly, like, well, that's just worldly psychology. So as you're unpacking this idea of the inner child, how do you see this through a biblical lens and help people maybe who aren't familiar with these kind of concepts realize that we're not going off on the deep end psychologically, but this is just kind of a normal human experience that we would all benefit from understanding better?
The word psychobabble is something that comes up every once in a while. You hear that. But you know what? Let's first take a look at why the inner child, why it is not how it is not from a biblical perspective. Okay. First and foremost, one, it's not an excuse for any destructive behaviors. And it doesn't replace that idea, the concept of sin or accountability. We are accountable. We have to own our stuff. The inner child model basically is a therapeutic tool that helps to provide a rationale for someone's behavior. It doesn't give an out for why that person did what they did. So the inner child also, from a biblical perspective, is not a repressed version of ourselves. Okay, it's not that, they would refer to it. People who've done other inner child models look at that kid and say, oh, that's the true self. You're buried. My inner child model that's not the true self. Okay, that is not my kid. My kid is scared. He's lonely. He's confused. He's filled with all of these painful emotions that are not going to go away. And he doesn't know how to deal with them. The reason he doesn't know how to deal with them because nobody showed him how. My inner child also doesn't have the power to set us free. Okay, that's Jesus' role.
Amen.
Okay? That is not my inner child. My inner child wants one thing: comfort. He wants the comfort from this frightening, negative emotions and feelings that he's going through. And he doesn't have the power to transform us. That is not what he does. He is nothing more than a subconscious representation of our unresolved childhood pain points that still haunt us today. Now, what he does have the power to do, he has the power to increase our anxiety level when he attempts to correlate something from the past with some sort of negative event that happened right now. And when that anxiety level of ours increases, our anxiety, right, it rises. That then leads to an increase in compulsiveness. And an increase in compulsiveness is ultimately going to lead to an increase in the risk of poor decision making.
It is interesting. One of the things, and I think when this question comes up from Christians, sometimes we wish we had just like a verse that's like, oh, let's just right here. It's perfect. It's clear right here. But I think for me, the more that we've had conversations, the more I've learned about this whole process is that God designed our brains in a very specific way. And our brains, like our bodies, are intended to, when we're in pain or when we experience trauma, we react. And that is a God-given ability. I mean, that's how we stay alive. Like if you get hurt doing something, it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that again because I don't want to get hurt because that's not good for me. But I think that there is something to be said about the way that science is now showing how God designed our brains from the beginning to internalize trauma and the messages and what we believe and how that plays out in our daily lives. And so I wouldn't say that that's like, hey, that's where you go for like proof of a biblical model. But I think you can still make a case that like God, is weaving us together in our mother's womb, including our brain and our body and the way it reacts to trauma and pain in life.
Absolutely. I mean, because the inner child model is a trauma model. And what it does, it helps people to answer the why question. Why does sex have a stronghold on my life? And you could take the word sex out and you could put anything else in.
Yeah,
why
absolutely.
does depression, anxiety, why does alcoholism? Put anything in there. And it's that self-reflection, if you look at that, that's what's very biblical about the inner child model. If we want to go to a verse, I can actually go to Second Corinthians that talks about examining ourselves.
That's
We
good.
are told, and again, there we're told to examine ourselves to make sure that we're in the faith. But it's like that with everything. We need to test what's going on within us because just like I understood when I was told, oh, you have an avoidant, attachment disorder, I was then empowered. I was empowered to make real changes in my life because now I knew what was going on. I wasn't just a womanizer, a player, a pervert, whatever. No, there was something that was wrong, and it was from my emotional base, and I needed to uncover that. And that's how this whole inner child thing started to develop.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you're sharing, Eddie, the verse that came to mind for me is the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians saying that when I was a child, I thought like a child, I acted like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I put childish ways behind me. And I think a lot of what we're discussing here is the need for us to mature in all areas of life. And I remember in my own story how helpful that was for me to disarm shame, because when I thought of my struggles with pornography as primarily a sin issue, and it is sin, I don't want to discount that, but when I thought of it only through that lens, there was a lot of shame of I do wrong things, I make bad choices, maybe because I'm a bad person, shame on me. But through this lens of maturity, it's like, oh, maybe there's parts of me that haven't been trained or taught how to mature. And I've gotten stuck in immaturity in that emotional, relational, or even how I think sexually. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that because we don't grow up in environments that really intentionally train us how to mature in so many areas of our life. And so we may be an adult male or female physically and intellectually, and the degrees behind our name or our careers, but we might be very immature. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I just mean a reality of life. Like we may have failed to develop because no one showed us how or helped us develop in those areas.
You're getting into the whole idea and concept of the emotionally undeveloped man,
Yeah.
There you
which
go.
is from Why Men Struggle to Love. But if I can go back to the moment for what you just talked about with shame, that's how the inner child aspect of this all came to be. Because when I began this and started it in my practice, and again, I found 9 reasons why men abuse sex. And that's what it was. And each of them are about a particular emotional pain point. And that's what I would use. I give these guys these 2 sheets of paper and say, here are 9 things I identified. There'd be a little paragraph about all of each of them, and then say, which ones do you resonate with most? And then we work on those. Well, then there was an idea, it was a book that I read about 20 years ago. Sorry, I can't remember who the author is. I can't remember the name of the book. But what he talked about was externalizing the addiction. And talk to your addict. And then it dawned on me, you know what? One of the major problems that men have, or even women who struggle with this, is the shame factor. That is what's going to keep them in many cases from being able to manage their addiction. What if I externalize the shame? And that became the inner children. Now, it wasn't in a sense that you look at it and say, oh, there's my problem. That's the problem. If I didn't have that inner child, I wouldn't have done what I've done. No, that's not what this is. What it is, oh, that inner child, I can help manage him. And if I can manage him, I can now stay one step ahead of my addiction. And that's how the 9 inner children came to be.
Totally. Okay, so another kind of question that can come up, and I know that this is predominantly, at least in our experience, men specifically in the church, but I think in the church as a whole, there can be this idea of like emotions are weak, or this inner child idea is weak or something that's childish and we should avoid. How would you respond to that? Like, what would you say, particularly to men, because I think they struggle with it more often than not, but really just to anybody who feels like this is like weak and should be avoided? What would you say?
Right. Well, and that's a great question. But I would take them to the concept of what are we trying to accomplish with this? They tell them, put the inner child over here for a moment. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to challenge you to embrace the concept of self-reflection. Okay. And therefore, to understand that, you know, we should be curious about the question why. Why do I think, feel, and act the way I do? Because again, as I said before, that's going to empower you. The inner child model that I developed is about growth. It's about mental, emotional, and spiritual growth. It is about the transformation of the heart. I am not trying to get men just to stop doing X, Y, and Z behavior. I'm getting them to transform. So therefore, for them to take a deeper look at the inner child model, because it's not like the other ones that have been written about and told in the past. This is something very different. My inner child is stubborn, pig-headed, cunning, selfish, but most of all, he's afraid, just like men are. Okay, we don't want to admit that we're afraid, but we are. And it's about learning how to be able to take that kid and go back to what you were saying, Nick, that kid who keeps us immature because we run on his emotions and not rational thinking. So it becomes a different way. I want to get men to think differently, to feel differently, to act differently, not just about this one behavior that is causing problems, but all things in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people may just have an aversion to these ideas because they fear they're being called childish. And just because you're looking to deal with your inner child doesn't mean you're childish. It's just facing a reality. And if it's helpful, I think, for someone to think of it in other terms, we're trying to unpack in some way, shape, or form what happened to me in my past that's leading to where I'm at now. What makes this make sense? Where does this come from? And the terminology could be an inner child, and understanding those wounds and understanding what the messages it's heard. But I think if we need to detach that, we're not trying to call anyone childish. We're just looking at what happened to me and how does that help me understand my story at a much deeper level.
Well, and it's funny, Eddie, as you were describing it as this model, I just was in a training last week with a guy who is a marriage and family therapist and uses Legos as a way to have people like kind of dramatize where they're at emotionally. And it's like, hold on a second, we're playing with toys now? This is what we're doing in therapy? I'm playing with these, toys that my kids play with. And it's cool because if you just allow yourself to enter that space, there are some incredibly powerful things that can happen. And what I hear you saying is it's the same thing with this inner child model, that it puts us in a different frame of mind that helps maybe bring language or explain our experiences in a way that where we're at currently with our day-to-day framework, we can't actually enter into. Am I hearing you right?
Absolutely. And you know what? I don't mind. I've never done the Lego thing, but I'll say this. And again, I need to understand more about it. If it worked, I would add it into the component.
Totally.
The one thing is that what we do is, in many cases, we'll have people draw, but we don't have them draw with their dominant hand. They have to draw with their non-dominant hand because I want to see what I might get out of that picture. But again, the whole idea of this is not, as you were saying before, putting a label on someone that you are childish. Now, we are immature. 9 out of 10 men that I've worked with, emotionally, as I call them now, emotionally undeveloped. But every man that I've talked to, and I've said, you know what? I believe that you're emotionally immature. I've yet to have a single person push back on me, not one. And that goes to show because, and again, you could be very successful. You could have, a lot of accomplishment, as you said before, all the letters after your name, but we weren't given what we needed to be given at a young age in those early years of childhood development that allow us to be able to deal with some of the very emotional problems and issues that we face as adults. We learn to run.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's unpack that, Eddie. Talk to us a little bit about if we have an inner child, and I think in some regard we all do. We have parts of us that need to be reparented, that need to understand love and value and acceptance in a new way. And so if that's true, then there's a part of us that's been wounded or hurt. And so unpack a little more. Where does that inner child come from? What are some of the ways that the inner child in us gets wounded and damaged? And how early in life does some of this start?
Yeah, it can happen extremely early in life. And it can go throughout even into our teen years. And basically, most of the time, it's based on traumas, again, physical, you know, sexual, mental, emotional, many different things. Could happen because of people, could happen because of circumstances, could be neglect, and not neglect in the sense that, oh, somebody didn't feed me or clothe me or put a roof over my head, but more of emotional neglect. They weren't there to be able to give me the praise I needed, to notice me when I needed it, or just to help me, most importantly, deal with this emotional pain and distress that I have. My inner child is locked in a time warp. He is back there wherever those pains came from. And and he's very afraid. And the reason he's afraid because he doesn't know how to handle this emotional distress. There was no adult in the room to be able to walk him through it. So therefore, with that, he had to come up with a solution. What am I going to do with this distress? What do I do with the bully next door? What do I do with the fact that, oh my gosh, I broke this toy that cost my parents a lot of money, and then when they find out, they're gonna, I'm gonna be in big trouble. What do I do with the fact that, oh, I get teased because, you know what, my teeth are crooked or my clothes aren't as good as everybody else, and there's nobody here to help me with it because if you go to them, you get, hey, I wouldn't worry about it. It's no big deal. Look, I don't have the time, or you know what, you don't know what you're talking about. Get out of my face, whatever it may be. What is the solution? Well, this kid doesn't have a lot of worldly experiences. He also more emotionally based in his thinking than he is cognitively based. So he comes up with one solution, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant for a kid that age. I won't think about it. I won't think about it. Well, how did he do that? He distracts himself. Too much food, too much television, maybe too much fantasy in his own head, not sexual fantasy, just fantasy in general. And then we move into our adolescent, our teen years, our adult years, and what we do is we change out the behavior. And at some point, the men that we are working with stumble across sex and they say, oh my gosh, this is the mother of all distraction. This one right here, this can keep me distracted 24/7. So whenever your child gets activated, there you're going to go. You're going to run away just like you did when you were in your younger years.
One of the things I've just recently heard, I'm going through a book and a program called Positive Intelligence, and the author talks about how his dad growing up was very abusive, verbally, physically, and it's interesting. He describes it this way, how his brain was pursuing safety, was that in order to constantly feel safe, he had to like rationalize in his brain that his dad is safe. There must be something wrong with me. Because if there isn't something wrong with me, then this primary caregiver of mine is not safe and I can't live in that environment. And so it's fascinating to me how often that happens to us, where it's not even what is going on, it's how we process that at such a young age that then sets a trajectory, that we don't realize can be so destructive and damaging. But I just think it's fascinating. And I feel like the reason why I'm saying that is just to make sense that it's maybe not these terrible things that are happening to you, but it is how you internalize that and process that at that young age that maybe sets you up for unhealthy behaviors.
Again, what you're talking about is children being egocentric. Okay. Therefore, whatever happens, it is because of me. It's centered around me as a child. And so therefore, and you're right, if I try to paint my parent as bad, wait a second, I need that parent. Who's going to take care of me then? Who's going to feed me? So therefore, I have to instead turn it inward. And now we have the development of low self-worth, of all those negative narratives that we carry on with us into our teen and adult world.
Yeah, well, I like the phrase you used, Eddie. You call it, we're time warped into a spot, and we know that from brain research as well, that when these kind of things happen to us in our formative years, our brain that is not fully developed, that is a childish brain, computes it as being necessary for survival. And what we have to do to survive, the brain holds on to because it doesn't want to forget those things. And that's where, in a very literal sense, we might be stuck in a memory of being 5 years old because our brain has identified this is what I do to protect myself from that fear. And we can be 35 or 55 or 75 and still responding out of that same place because there is a time warp. We're stuck there. And until we understand it, can, through an adult brain and with the help of a loving community, go back with others and understand where the message came from, what truth and reality was, where God was at, we may be stuck in that moment for a lifetime. And as I've shared on the brain in our seminars, it's like to remind people, this is the beauty of God's design in the brain, that we needed God to design our brains to remember things that are associated with survival. But because we grow up in a sinful and fallen world, we calculate all kinds of things as being necessary for survival that really aren't about our physical survival, but are about creating that emotional safety that you're talking about, Eddie.
Let's add another component to all of that. What if we have repressed that memory? Okay. So now we're still going to get triggered. There are triggers that are going to happen that are going to bring forth that, but we will not be conscious of what it is. So now we are afraid or uncomfortable about something, and we don't really even quite understand what it is. And over time, if we continue using what the inner child does, that mechanism, that coping strategy of, well, you know what? I don't want to sit with this distress. I'm just going to run. That's where we go. And how many guys will run, do something, from with the addiction, and then later sit there and say, what was that about? What in the world led me to go and do that? I never thought I was going to do that again, but yet here I am one more time.
Yeah. I feel like you're already talking about where we're going with the next question, and it's how does our wounded inner child play out in our adult lives? Like, what are the signs that reparenting our inner child is so necessary?
We talked a little bit about this, but let me put it in a orderly format for you, okay? So our inner child has taught us years ago that we need to distract ourselves from emotional discomfort, right? Why? Well, because again, we weren't taught by our parents how to sit with this discomfort, whether they ignored us, they minimized it, they would be angry with it, whatever it may be. People who have addictions have a difficult time sitting with emotional pain or discomfort. So we don't have that. The inner child then also represents the unresolved childhood pain point. So our kid, how did he get triggered? By current day event that he believes is something from the past. It looks very similar. It's like the two worlds colliding. Something just happened today that seemed very similar to something from the past. And he puts those two together, and therefore it activates one of our core emotional triggers, such as I'm not good enough, I've been rejected, I don't feel safe. Well, when that first original negative event happens, your anxiety level has elevated. Once the kid brings in that memory, which again could be repressed, you're not aware of it, your anxiety level continues to grow. So now, and you're thinking that it's based on this event that just happened. I'll give you a real quick example. Let's say you have a really good friend and you guys had a falling out and you run across each other in the street one day and you talking and somebody said, hey, maybe we should get together and see if we can work this out. You say, okay, yeah, let's do that. So you schedule lunch. Well, the day of lunch comes and you get a phone call from him. He goes, hey, look, something happened. I can't make it. You know what? I'll see if I can get back to you by. And hangs up. Just like that. I mean, it's less than 7 seconds long. And you're sitting here and saying, did I just get blown off? What was that about? Damn rude, wasn't it? Well, your kid reaches out into a storage unit and he pulls something out. You're not aware, but he remembered the time when you were about 9 years old and you went down the street to Bobby's house and you knocked on the door to see if Bobby can come out. Bobby opens up the door and there's him and three of your friends. You're sitting there and you're saying, "What are you guys doing?" And they go, "We're just hanging out." "Well, how come you didn't call me?" "Oh, we didn't think about it. I don't know. Whatever. Do it." "Well, can I come in?" And Bobby goes, "No, my mom said we can't have anybody else," and slams the door in your face. And you go home and you're going home. Maybe you have some tears in your eyes and you're wondering, why don't people ever chase me? Why don't people, come to me and see what I want to do? And again, making feel that kid feels dismissed, your inner child. So he's putting these two things together. You're not aware. All you think is that if your anxiety continues to grow, it's because of the phone call. Well, it's not just the phone call. It's because you have experienced other things in your life that bring up the feelings that I've been dismissed, I'm not noticed, I feel invisible. All of these things are coming up. You may not have knowledge, but the emotions are there. And as your anxiety continues to increase, I can't sit with pain. What am I going to do? I'm running. And before you know it, you're off doing something. And it may not even be from the sexual nature, but maybe the next person you engage with, you just explode at them for some reason. There could be many other things that happen. Maybe you go and start to binge on food. So, but again, I need some sort of comfort. Remember what I said? My inner child, what is his only need? And that is comfort. So that gives you an example of how that could play out.
Yeah, that's a great story. I really appreciate that. And I think just to make sure we're being real clear, when you ask about signs, Trevor, I would say to anyone that feels like I keep using a substance, whether it's food, drugs, alcohol, sex, masturbation, any kind of substance that I know is hurtful for me or others, and yet I can't seem to stop going back there, and we would often call that an addiction, that's a sign that there is inner child work to be done. There is something deeper that's driving this behavior. It's not just about that the food is good or sex feels good or that, yes, drugs and alcohol can be addictive. That's a part of it. But if we keep running back there, there's something deeper driving it, and that's a sign we all want to be aware of. And the other thing that comes to mind for me is what I would call disproportionate responses. That if the trigger and our response are very disproportionate, and so maybe someone slightly inconveniences me and I blow up, like, okay, there's a little indication there that there's some inner child work, that you've had a fear trigger pushed, you've had an anxiety or a shame trigger pushed. We've used often like the illustration of being cut off in traffic. And if that response from you is like you're yelling in your car and flipping people off and just like, okay, those moments where you realize my response was not in line with what happened to me, it's that opportunity to look and say, oh, that's a sign something deeper is going on. Where's this coming from? And I think we all could probably come up with examples like that. And we may not, back to Eddie's illustration, we may not have the memory right away of walking to little Bobby's house, but that to me is the value of group and of the kind of processes that Eddie leads men and women through and that we do at Pure Desire. It's that we haven't made the connections. And so let's walk through, well, you're aware of the current behavior. Let's start to figure out what were some of those moments that created these inner child wounds, because when you can piece it together, that's a huge game changer.
So let me just real quick, just to double back. It's not normal to yell at people and flip them off when they cut you off normally?
I would call that a disproportionate response,
okay.
Trevor.
All right, good enough.
Yes.
I'm going to write that down. Just kidding. No, I think...
I will tell you, you know what? The one thing that I love about your Pure Desire groups, because again, I've gone through the material, I've sent so many men there, is that a lot of what you do when you have people go back and start to look at those childhood wounds is very similar to what this inner child is like also. It's very, very similar. And not all approaches, not all therapy take this type of approach.
Yeah.
And I think it's critical. I think it's something that's definitely needed.
Yeah. And I can say it's not just like, I can tell you right now, because I've done some, like not enough, but some inner child work, that my entire personality is wrapped around running away from emotional pain. Like I literally can tie like the fact that I have so many different interests and the fact that I don't like sitting still and the fact that I can't be present in the moment is all tied to things that I internalized earlier in life. So if you're
And
wondering,
that's why, Trevor, that's what we talk about. That's why I say what's so important, self-reflection.
totally.
Like you said, you just sat there now and just outlined, all these various different behaviors. And you can go back and you can look and you can tie them to what the kid is doing, trying to get you to not sit with your emotional pain.
Yeah. So on the maybe positive side, Eddie, in your book, you identify 5 core needs for healthy emotional development that we all have. So can you talk a little bit about those core needs and how do we go about getting them met in our daily lives? It's maybe especially if we realize I've got a past where many of these needs weren't met.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what happens is in the early stages of childhood development, there are 5 different areas that a parent should be walking us through. And it starts with connection, okay, learning how to bond with other people. And like, for example, with me, I got bonding when I was, you know, 2, 3, 4, because I know I felt was a very happy kid. But once my dad dies and my mom have her nervous breakdown, that connection is severed. And now I don't have it any longer. And this is where, through a connection, is where our attachments form. So whether it's a secure attachment or perhaps it's anxious or it's avoidant, whatever it may be, that's what's happening. So we need that strong connection. In some cases, again, for parents who maybe they were very young when they got married and had a child, and they don't really know how to, bond and attach with a kid, or they are too much into their own lives still, or perhaps maybe you are number 7 of 9 kids, and parents are just kind of giving up at that point. There for many reasons why you may not get that connection aspect that's taught to you. Then we have attunement. Attunement is where I get to really kind of pick up and read where people are, what they are, what their emotions are, their feelings, what their body language and such. This is where it really comes into play, where a mother, with a baby, really trying to show the baby the different facial expressions that they can pick up on. Now again, attunement can be severed at any point also for whatever reason. But if I'm not attuned, I'm going to be rather indifferent toward people. Trust. How do we build trust? That's number 3. Well, trust is that as a child, I can walk away, I can go explore, but I know when I go back, I don't have to go very far, and one of my parents are there. There's somebody waiting for me. For me, again, let's go back to my story. All right. At 5, there's nobody there. All right. They're gone. They're just gone. So therefore, it became very difficult for me to trust. I have autonomy. That is the idea that I can have some level of independence as a child. I'm not being smothered by parents. And then finally, there is the love and sexuality. And you may be saying, wait a second, sexuality, what that have to do with a child? Well, you know what? We're teaching kids, even at a very young age, about the idea of integrating love with sexuality. Because if it's not integrated, what you're going to do is you're going to have individuals who are going to build a relationship based on physical intimacy. And that is not God's design for our relationship. Design is that it's built on emotional intimacy, and we sprinkle physical in to support it. So where did a kid run into a problem here? Well, let's say you have a little boy, maybe 4 years old, and he walks around with his hand down his pants, not because he's trying to sexually stimulate himself. It's just that it's soothing for him. And so therefore, let's say you have a parent who should be saying, hey, you know what, Tommy, take your hand out of there. That's not really polite. We shouldn't be doing that. I know it feels good, but we don't put our hand down there. Versus a parent who grabs the hand out, smacks it, you dirty little boy. That is disgusting. How could you even touch your thing like that? What you've done is you now set in motion for the child that there's something here with my sexual organ that is wrong, that is bad. And so now what you've done is you've disconnected the love from the sexuality. And we need to try to keep them engaged. So therefore, a child doesn't later on, like I say, build relationships based on physical intimacy as opposed to emotional.
What I like what you said earlier, the awareness piece is so important because I think that if we know that these are places that we're lacking in, we have that, interestingly enough, we have that autonomy or the agency to pursue that in relationship. To know that, maybe and I can say this for sure. I had similar experiences, growing up with love and sex being kind of pulled apart in that way. But understanding that being in a pure desire group, it helps me, redefine what sex is and redefine what intimacy actually is. I think that that's one way for sure that we can start to address it. And as you were sharing, I was thinking about it. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old son, and they both oftentimes like in the bath or touching their penis. And for me, I react from my past and addiction where it's like, whoa, don't come on, don't do that. Like, that's not okay. But what I'm doing is I'm projecting my experiences onto them. And so what and my wife, we've had to cause it's kind of funny when you're watching them do it. You're like, why are you doing that? That seems so silly. But being able to even say you're really funny and you're silly, and I know that you like to do that, but when you're around other people, it's not appropriate to do something like that. So, and so trying to do that on a relational level, what's interesting is in doing that with my kids, I've also found that helps redefine it for me. That even though I had this addictive mindset that that's what that was, for me, it helps me build some more of that into my own story or my own understanding. And I'm not saying that's the only thing that comes out of it, but it's that cool kind of dual thing that happens where I'm helping my kid understand this, but even in doing that, I'm better processing the reality of the situation.
One thing that's been very interesting about the two books is that when people read them, one of the biggest reactions I get immediately is, oh my gosh, what I've done to my kids.
Yeah.
Because they see themselves and they're like, even as a parent, I've been doing this. I haven't affirmed the way I should. I don't pay that attention the way I should. I don't show that curiosity. My kids see me being hypersensitive to criticism and such and being defensive. So therefore, it's also a really good tool for them to be able to help to better parent their own children.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is I think this really serves as a motivation for us to do the hard work of turning in and looking back and reparenting our inner child, because I really believe we can only parent our children to the level we've parented our inner child. Because if we're still being driven by a lot of shame and fear and those wounds of our past, we will inadvertently parent out of that, as you're saying. And I think the flip side of it is when we do some of this hard work, when we go through group, when we get counseling, when we read books like Eddie's and we understand what's going on and what's driving me, it does actually change the lens of our parenting. I mean, imagine, Trevor, having that experience you just did with your boys during bath time. If you had no healing story, no pure desire work, your reaction might have been very shaming, and you would never even have thought twice about it. Because it's just like, well, that's what my parents told me, oh, put that away, or don't do that. That's wrong. What's wrong with you? And we would have just done that almost second nature, because that's what we learned, and then missed how, I've just passed on the very kind of trauma and triggers that were given to me. And so if anyone out there was looking for motivation to do the work, I think that's one of them. And obviously we don't have to have kids to need a motive to do this kind of work. But what I loved about your list, Eddie, to say to that as well, is how when we're really feeling a draw towards our old behavior or that unwanted way of soothing ourselves, this is a list we could almost look through and go, well, what am I really needing right now? Is my real true need for connection? Or is it for attunement with other people? Is it for trust or autonomy? Do I feel trapped and smothered and I'm just looking for some autonomy in my life? Or is it that loving connection? And if we see the deeper needs, then we can work with God and others to say, how do I meet those? And what comes to mind too is what our friend Ben Bennett says is we've found illegitimate ways to meet legitimate needs. And what you're describing here, Eddie, are 5 legitimate needs we have. And if we can see them, then we can start to pursue healthy ways of having them met.
So one of the things that I loved in your book, Why Men Struggle to Love, is you talk about blind spots. And I think that the blind spots that we have are a lot of the reasons why that we're not able to address these things, right? And so what are some of the most common blind spots that many of us have? How do we identify them? And then what does it look like to actually address those blind spots?
There's 14 that I identified. And again, this was with my work and
Just
research with
14? Oh
men.
man, I got a lot of work to do.
14.
Hold on, let me pull out my pencil. Number.
Well, you know what? I had what? There were 9 kids. There are now going to be 11 because we're doing a second printing of the Going Deeper book in the fall because we're adding the Amesh child, which I can't believe I missed in the first place. And we're also doing the spiritually wounded child. So they're growing in numbers. I don't think we'll find more blind spots. I think I'm pretty much got
I don't
them
know. You
covered
might
here.
have a blind spot to 15 or 16. So yeah.
Well, I guess you never know, but I think this is a pretty comprehensive list. If you had to look at again of the 14, which are those that are the most troublesome? And again, they all cause problems in our lives because what they do is they prevent us from being able to cultivate healthy relationships. Well, one is one that we've been talking about quite a bit today, and that is avoiding emotional pain. Okay, because if we can't sit with emotional distress, we can't sit with that discomfort. Okay, we are going to find other ways of being able to manage that. And that could be avoiding people, okay, withdrawing. It could be, again, going back to minimizing. You know what? This is not something that's important. I don't want to talk about it. It could be running to some sort of addictive behavior or destructive behavior. So we have to learn how to sit with that pain. How do we do that? Well, first and foremost, and I know this sounds silly, but it's so true. We have to understand sitting with pain is not going to kill us. We're going to be okay. It's going to be all right. But you just need, and go back to one of you mentioned, I think it's you, Trevor, you said even having problems sitting still. Most people who have problems with addiction, they have a problem sitting still. And that's where I go with a lot of this stuff. The big thing is, and it's kind of funny, everybody laughs at me now because I say it so often in the way I say it, slow everything down. We have to learn to do that. We've spent way too much of our lives with our head down, running through life. And now we have to have our head up and we have to be looking and observing and slowing things down and be able to sit with that pain and being able to process it. But see, a lot of the times what you're going to notice with this emotional pain is that it is based on a lot of the raw emotions of our inner child. So therefore, if we're going through and I sit with this pain, I go through it, then I have another step. As I slow everything down, I move from what I feel to what is real. And now I'm looking at it through a wise mind, through rational thinking. Go back to that example I gave you before about the guy who, he from Bobby's house in the phone call. All right, what are the raw emotions? I've been, dismissed. He doesn't really care. He's duping me. All I've been rejected. All these things, right? That's what this kid's feeling, and he's feeling some of it. I move over to rational thinking. Well, you know what? Yeah, maybe some of those emotions are right. Yeah, I do feel like he was rather abrupt. I think it was rather rude. But you know what? Maybe he really did have an emergency. Maybe there's something really wrong. I don't know if I have enough information that I can say that he's trying to blow me off and he doesn't want to try to get back to be friends again. I, I've slowed everything down. I'm not running because see, when we're processing these emotions, that's where we stop. We don't process it. We feel them and then we stop when we just run off. Here now I've slowed it down. I'm processing. Now I can make a good, healthy choice. What would that be? Well, you know what? Maybe I'll give him a couple of days, see how he's doing. I'll call him. Hey, everything all right? Do you want to try to get together again? If he says yes, great. If he says no, maybe I have to say, maybe you need more time. Maybe you need to think about it more. Yep, that's what I'll do. slowed it all down. So that's one. The second one that I think is of the top is inwardly focused. We become inwardly focused, especially when, for example, someone like me, who you believe that the people who love you are not going to be there for you. The people who are supposed to be there are not reliable. I feel like I have to take on everything myself. There's no one there for me emotionally. So therefore I turn inward. And turning inward, immediately, whatever comes up in my life, it's going to be more about what do I want? What do I need? And it's not looking outward to see what others may need or want. And then if I look at the third one of the 14, I think is fear. Fear, in fact, fear runs through all 14 of these blind spots. And fear is, I think fear is at the heart of almost every disorder that we deal with. And you look at fear and what do you do there? Well, you know what? I need to learn to be able to, as I slow everything down, to move forward despite my fear and not allow it to limit me and the possibilities that I can have. Because again, that's what scripture tells us. Fear not. Okay? How many times the word, is it in there to tell us, do not fear, over and over and over again? Why? Because God knew that our fear would be destructive for us in limiting us in what we could really do and accomplish for his glory.
As you share these things, Eddie, which are all great, by the way, it occurs to me that these are not easy things, right? This is not like a lighthearted, knock it out in a Tuesday afternoon kind of work. This takes time. It takes emotional investment. And I really think there's a recognition here. We may have spent a lifetime insulating ourselves away from seeing or feeling these things. And that's why they're blind spots. And it just reiterates for me again, why community is so valuable, why the input of others and truly being open to it is absolutely critical in this journey. And if you're really brave, take this question to your spouse, take this question to your group and say, hey, what do you see when it comes to my emotional reactions? Where do I have blind spots? What do you see that I'm not seeing? I think in my own story, it was my wife had said some of these things before, but I wasn't really listening to them until we were in counseling and I was kind of being humbled to the reality of how bad things had gotten. And then when she was saying something like, your schedule and your needs always come first. What you are doing is always the priority and it makes me feel second best. And it was like, well, I'd heard her say that before, but it was in our counseling journey where I heard it and was able to receive it and recognize, oh, there's a blind spot here, where that's kind of how I protect myself, is by getting my way and doing it right my way, that I get stuff done. But in the process of doing that, I was hurting people. And so it was there. Others could see it, but I wasn't able to receive it. And so I think when it comes to this work, just recognize it's not easy, but it's worth it. And you've got to invite others into the process.
The word I use often in the book is oblivious. We were oblivious to all of it. And the reason it's difficult is because none of it is natural. It's not natural to us because it's something we should have been taught and in those early developmental years, and we weren't. The good thing is, however, that we can. And what I don't talk about eliminating blind spots. I talk about softening blind spots, because they're never going to completely go away.
We have a weakness there.
Yeah, totally.
You can talk to my wife and she will tell you they never fully go away. So I still struggle at times.
I hear you there. And thank God that he designed our brain that this is not natural, because what is natural is to avoid pain. And I mean, thank God for that, because otherwise we would have probably all killed ourselves off because we wouldn't be smart enough to avoid real pain in this world. And so your brain wants to avoid what's painful, but sometimes it even avoids the good kind of pain that will change us. And so that's where we have to realize if I just, kind of take the easy route here, I'm never really going to change, because I will keep finding new ways to avoid the pain. But if I can see that there's real growth I want and it's worth the effort to get there, and I sit with the pain and I face the pain and I allow others to show me the things I'm missing, there's better that comes on the other side, right? There's better relationships, there's better emotional health, there's better parenting, there's better responses to difficulties, because we're all going to go through difficulties sooner or later. And so if we can see that, it's like what was said of Jesus in the book of Hebrews, that for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He wasn't looking forward to the cross. He was looking forward to what he knew the cross would produce in us and for the kingdom of God. And that's kind of what this pain is like for us. You don't have to look forward to the pain, right? I've said to many guys, like, it's okay if you don't want to do group. It's hard. It's difficult. But if you can see the value of what doing group or counseling will bring into your life, and you're doing it for that, then that's reason enough to face the pain and get towards the joy that comes on the other side. So
once again, what are we trying to accomplish?
Yes.
Transformation. I want to put somebody, on the path of sanctification, maybe for the first time, or I want to put them back on the pathway and let them understand that, hey, guess what? You're going to fall off again. You're going to slide over, but it's okay. Get back up, brush yourself off, stay on it. Because again, we're trying to get in, and you know what? You'll be light years away from being Christ-like on the day of judgment. But that's okay. We all will. Again, what are we doing? We're just all hopefully moving the right way. Because again, ultimately, what's your legacy? What do you want people saying about you when you're gone? Oh, he worked hard. He was really good in putting everything together, details and stuff. Or is it the idea that, wow, you know what? When it came to relationship, when it came to people, that was first and foremost where his heart was.
Yeah. That's awesome. And Eddie, this has been such a great conversation. I'm sure everyone's gotten something as a takeaway, but as we wrap up this episode, if you could give someone a final piece of encouragement or in maybe, one idea, like leave them with something about understanding and reparenting their inner child, what would you say to people as we wrap up today?
What I would say is a little bit about what we've just been talking about, that, you know what, it's very frightening to try to think about going down this pathway and trying to really look at yourself, because again, a lot of times we'll let our shame get in the way. But God does not want that to happen. In fact, God wants you to stand in front of him and show him your shame, not so he could point it out and say, what's wrong with you? So that he could say, wait, let me take that. Because no son of mine or daughter of mine should sit and be riddled with shame. Okay? Yes, you may have done things that were wrong, but you are forgiven. And therefore, take that wonderful gift that you've been given and move forward to continue to grow mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
What comes to mind for me is just, we've talked about how it's uncomfortable and it's painful, and this model can really bring a lot of different things up. But the visual that keeps coming to mind is like surgery and physical therapy. Like, you do surgery correctively so that you can have a healthier life, so that your life can continue. And you do physical therapy so you can build the strength back up, so you're not having to limp around the rest of your life or have full movement in a part of your body. And I think that this is the same thing, that it's that even though, and this is similar to what you were saying, Nick, even though it is difficult and it's scary and it's going to be uncomfortable, it doesn't mean that it's not for your betterment. And so using this model is going to include those things, but knowing that you can walk a little better or use different parts of who God's created you to be in better ways, know that that's what we're after.
Yeah, and I think my last piece of encouragement would just be to say, in this process, make sure you approach it with a lot of grace for yourself. Because I think there can be a tendency to look down on what we perceive to be weak or childish, or, it's like, oh, grow up, get over it already. And maybe we've had that condescending, critical tone that actually makes it a lot harder to go back there because we feel bad about it. But if we're like, you know what, I'm going to be gracious towards the parts of me that were too young to know what was happening and got hurt before they even know why and didn't know how to process it. Man, how can I help? And to realize that God, your Father, feels the same way about you as well. That for any one of us, if we had a 5-year-old child come to us that was hurt, I think our natural heart is to help and not to be like, well, what's wrong with you? Why are you crying? It's like, man, what's wrong? How can I help? And to see, well, respond to the 5-year-old part of yourself that way too, because then we can partner with God, I think, to do the good work that he wants to do to bring healing and growth for all of us.
Eddie, this has been awesome, man. Thank you again. How can our listeners get in touch with you, your resources? How can they follow your work?
Books are available exclusively on Amazon because I have a partnership with them. They can go to innerchild-sexaddiction.com if they want to learn more about the inner child. And if they just want to reach out to me at edcappa, EDCAPPA at Gmail, I'd be more than happy to answer questions or point them in the right direction of other resources. We've trained a network of clinicians about the inner child model because when the book came out, it just, there was a firestorm that happened where people were calling and they want, help with their addiction, but they want it to do it from an inner child perspective. And still haven't figured out how to clone myself. So we really
Sure.
needed to train more clinicians about it. And so therefore we have a whole referral network if they need some.
Great. Yeah, man, this is great. We love this model. It makes a lot of sense, and I know it's very effective. So thank you again for your time and being with us, man. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And thank you guys for all the work you do. You guys do amazing work. And like I said, I'm a big Pure Desire fan. You don't realize that your groups and the other things that you do, the amount of help they've given to so many men. I see it, in my own guys who come back. I've seen it in other people who've talked about what you do. So again, thank you for that. And I continue to pray that God blesses your ministry.